Welcome to the 200th episode of the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach, and up next, a collection of studies on the brain-body connection and suggestions for runners. And after that, World of Running updates about champions around the world and brain research. Well, 200 episodes, huh? Mm-hmm. We should celebrate.
Yeah.
Or not. But...
What?
That's it. There's the celebration. But instead, we should talk about really interesting things. Because that's why people listen anyway.
I hope so.
And among those, this week's topic, I really enjoyed this kind of stuff. And Andy is the impetus behind it. So clearly she enjoys it as well. We often talk about how we can take the next step as a runner. Like, how do I advance my performance? How do I get to the next level? How do I achieve this next big goal or something like that, right? Those are common conversations. Well, most of the time, the best answer to those things is like physiological. What should I do differently in training? How should I strengthen, mobilize, and all that kind of stuff? But even then, there's always the mental game. And that's why this topic is especially interesting, because it's focusing on some of those angles that prove, or rather are proven, to influence our performances or our well-being in our performances or those types of things. So are we paying enough attention to those things, and what are some good ideas? That's what we're going to do. But before we do that, and while we do it at the same time, you're probably going to have questions. You have questions on your mind now, and you're going to have more as we're talking about interesting things like that. And you should ask them so that they don't go unspoken. Give voice to your thoughts, and do so by going to AtoZrunning.com/question, where you can simply submit a question via email, and it's the easiest way to do it. And then we'll feature it at the end of month Q&A episode, or if we don't have a chance to do that, we'll at least share some thoughts in response.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, we were able to compete Zach was, in a race that we've been doing for like a decade.
Well, just about. I don't know exactly how long we've been doing it, but it's become a tradition.
Yeah, it's a tradition. We started before children, and we have continued to go every single year to this 5K.
Is that like proof of a true tradition? If it started in a different phase of life, and
we brought others into this tradition, I suppose.
I don't know.
The whole point is we want to give a quick shout out to the Glen Arbor Women's Club, who put on a really fun event, the Running Bear 5K in Glen Arbor, Michigan. We love it. We love the Cherry Republic support as well, because Cherry Republic is all things cherry that are edible, that are delicious. And so it was both delicious and fun.
Well, the reason Andy says that is because all age group finishers, first and second in each age group, receive Cherry Republic prize boxes.
Yeah. My mom was second in her age group, so shout out to Mom. And so she also won some Cherry Republic prizes as well.
So it's just loads of fun, and it's definitely one of those like intimate community event types of things, kind of like the small town, small experience, and yet like it's people from all over the place, because it's kind of a tourism experience as well. So it's a very fascinating, fun time. We've loved it, and we appreciate the Glen Arbor Women's Club and their efforts continuing to put that on every year and growing it. Not just content to do the same thing every time, but now they've added layers, like it was chip timed for the first time ever, and they're continuing to go through the efforts to do that.
So those of you, an encouragement, because I know many of you personally who put on events and things, and just it's appreciated. There's a lot of memories that are made, and it's a great opportunity to not only test fitness, but also, make memories.
It is indeed that. So thank you to everybody. And with that, now let's get started with our discussion about some recent studies on how our minds affect running and what we might want to take away. So before Andy shares the first one, which is a very interesting one, well, they're all very interesting. Just like your questions are always very interesting.
And they're great.
That's the word I was looking for. Well, so what we're going to try to do here is we found a few different studies and some commentary on those studies from different sources that seem to be related to the same topic. And so we kind of brought them together here and want to share them with you, because what we're trying to do here with this topic is express for all of our sakes how our mind and body interact with each other in some of these instances, and what we might want to do or do differently as a result of some of that empirical evidence.
Actionable items. We like them.
Yes.
We're going to start with the importance of self-regulation. And this was from an article. There is research throughout, but I was able to dive into this information from the Reader MIT Press. And it started with researcher Dr. Vanna Hunter. And she says that in her research, top-level performers and athletes have self-regulation. She sees that like across the board. Athletes need self-regulation, she says, in order to perform. Everyone can learn, to some extent at least, to control their emotions, thoughts, and actions. And it is in this aspect, learning to self-regulate, that it is of particular interest to runners.
Now, she did also specifically indicate that those who demonstrate those capacities, like high-level performers and such, tend to also have degrees of excellence in other domains of life, because the self-regulation components that relate to what makes them great at the thing that they do are also things that are beneficial in other areas, as you might guess.
And she said that some people are maybe more naturally inclined toward self-regulation. It may be more in their nature, but she finds that people can learn it to some extent, as she said in that quote. And in their research, they didn't have like lifelong research done to know, like, are the top performers people who learned it or people who were born with it? And they don't really know that. So I think our takeaway here, because we can't control that, is that it can be learned.
That indeed. And so anytime you talk about like something like self-regulation, there's a huge like fatalist component to that type of thing, because it's like, well, if I don't develop those skills at a young age, chances are dispositionally I'm not likely to gain them in any great capacity after those formative years. However, I think that some of the information here helps give us some more practical, tangible things, even if I feel like I have not a strong grasp on such a skill.
And if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you run. And so you're already doing this. You're learning self-regulation. And Dr. Hutter suggests you need to actively seek out situations in which you are forced to confront your own thoughts and emotions. That has the most effect.
So you got to practice.
That sounds like running,
so you gotta,
right?
Yeah,
like
you gotta
put
practice.
Yourself in a situation that you're forced to confront your own thoughts and emotions. So if you listen to this podcast and you're a runner, you are doing this. But during that time, as we've mentioned on a previous podcast when we're talking about mental toughness or the thought of toughness with Steve Magnus, this is something that you can continue to hone in on and have objectives while you're running. And we'll get to more of that later. So there's an example of how your running affects your brain. Like, you want a tangible example, probably. Like, how does my mental state affect my running? Well, one small example that I've mentioned on this podcast, because I've struggled with it, is holding tension in the body with anxiety. And that causes you to be less efficient, and you're going to fatigue more easily. So that's just one of many examples of how your mental state can influence your performance.
That is fascinating.
It really is.
And as we've talked about that in the past, there's always kind of a degree of like you want to put yourself in an emotional state and then exercise the capacity to not let those emotions rule you. It's kind of in practice, I don't really want to be like stressed out all the time, but if I'm never under any stress, then when I enter a stressful situation, I have a harder time handling it, that type of thing. So finding the balance there.
And you've heard it said, and it might seem cliche, that stress brings on growth, but it has been researched both physically, when you have physical stress, and you have adaptations. Like, we put stress can be like running. Running is a stress on your body, and then you adapt. Well, same mentally. If you avoid uncomfortability, then you're less likely to grow. And so that's kind of the element that Dr. Hutter is suggesting when she says go seek out things that are difficult and force yourself to confront your thoughts and emotions.
Interesting. So we're going to connect some dots as we go, or rather as we wrap up a few of these in sequence here. In the back of your mind right now, be thinking about how does that relate to the idea of intuitive training. Okay. Keep thinking about that. So the next layer here, and it in fact connects very nicely to the final point made, which is that dealing with like the avoidance kind of experience versus the like entering into, and I think there's actually a term for it. And I wish I knew what it was, but it might come out as we're talking about the next one here. And that is, so as Steve Magnus has reported, and he does a Science Digest about once a month or so in his newsletter, and I appreciate it because he just kind of gives you like, here's some of the stuff that I've read recently, which is always fascinating. But this one in particular connects very nicely here because now in this article, referencing then a research study specifically on placebos and how we can create a positive state of mind through the use of placebos, right? Which is itself kind of seems a little backwards. Like you're tricking yourself into a positive state of mind. If you know it's a placebo, then does it really have a placebo effect? You know, all that kind of stuff, right? Well, first, let's look at what they did in the study because it's really kind of interesting. They took cyclists for this one. And actually, this kind of study is really a great one to do with cyclists because cycling, more so even than running, is possible for just about anyone to put themselves to the utter brink of maximum possible output. You put them on a training bike and you have them ride as hard as they can. You crank up the resistance slowly and then just push as hard as you can. You can do that more easily cycling than you can running. So in that sense, you can get like this clear sense. Oh, and I forgot to say, they also can measure it better because of the power output, the wattage of your actual pressure pushing down the pedals. So as such, this data is always just a little bit more precise than you might get running anyway here. So what they did with the cyclists is they said, okay, we are going to tell these cyclists that we're giving them a performance-enhancing substance and then have them ride and measure all of the stuff. And they didn't just measure the objective empirical outputs. They also measured things like some of the psychological considerations, like how you felt about it, your confidence level, your outlook, and some of those things. So they did all of that, and you can guess the result, right? The result clearly was those cyclists who were given the placebo but told it was a performance enhancer performed better than those who did not, versus they had better outlook as well, more confidence, all of those types of things, right? Now, what I don't know in this particular study, not having read through all of the details myself yet, I don't know if they did a trial, a test group within the placebo group. So like, we're going to test you, then give you the placebo, then test you again, like things like that. I don't know. But the conclusion is clear. It seems to be the case that even a placebo can produce better results. We know this to be true. We've known this for a long time. This is not new information. I think in the nature of how they studied it, they were just trying to make more empirical the connection between the performance and the mental state. And so then, as Andy was saying earlier, the concept of then like the avoidance and the the approaching. I guess approaching is the word. At least that's the way Magnus describes it. Approaching versus avoidance. So you enter into or approach the challenge, or you seek avoidance or try to diminish the stressor, the challenge.
And who has thought during a race where things start to unravel, or you're not maybe seeing the feedback that would suggest you are accomplishing the goal you'd set out for yourself, has anyone thought, man, like, what if I just stepped off right now? Like, what if I like fell down and just like stopped running, or like, or come up with the excuses even before you pull out. like, oh, well, today wasn't my day. Like you almost come up with the Strava post in your head.
Oh no!
Of like what you're gonna say.
Don't compose your Strava post while you're working out.
Well, what you're gonna say, like, oh, this thing was bothering me, and this thing, it wasn't my day. Blah blah blah. Like, because that is pulling out.
It's avoidance.
It's avoidance, yeah, and not entering into the moment at hand, of which we're being challenged, and again, as I mentioned earlier, the emotions and self-regulating those emotions.
So the ideal here, the goal result, as this study suggests is a possibility, is this concept that Steve Magnus calls positive performance cascade, which I really like I like the kind of the alliteration, but also I like the nature of the visual we get with that positive performance cascade, because you instigate something and then it follows kind of naturally. You don't have to keep instigating. And so what the suggestion here is, by putting yourself in a state of mind that is confident, where you're in a willingness to approach the challenge, the stressor, you're more likely to sustain that state of mind, or it cascades through the experience. And so what they've suggested then with this placebo test specifically is we ought to not discount the value of certain types of placebos to put us in a positive state of mind for that positive performance cascade. And the examples that Magnus gives, which I think all of us can start coming up with them as soon as I start saying this, is like, you have that singlet or that racing top that you really like, and you just feel like it looks good, it's fast, it's comfortable, like all the things, right? And when you wear that one versus like the kind of the frumpy, not quite fitted very well one that you don't love as much, but it's easy to grab off the shelf or hanger or wherever you put your garments. So anyway, the point is, you have some garments that you think, when I'm trying to race serious, that's what I want to wear. Or maybe it's shoes. Now, of course, shoes is a very different kind of question, because
it actually does help you.
There's a lot of things that, like, it's not placebo anymore. But even then, you might have a shoe color where it's like, if I am really trying to set a new personal best, I want a red shoe or a black shoe or a pink and purple shoe. Whatever the thing is, you get the point. You have these things. Actually, we would love to hear, now that we're thinking about this, comment on our stuff and tell us what those things are, your placebos that put you in that positive performance cascade, positive state of mind. But the point being is, we should leverage those things. We should not discount the value of doing that, and in fact, be deliberate about it. And I have to say, I do this. I've done this for many years, only simply because I like the sense of, I have these things that are devoted to, when I'm doing this and I want to do it well and seriously, these are the things I use. Mm-hmm. For example, I have racing shorts that are pretty much the only shorts I ever wear when I'm racing. And I don't wear them for anything else ever, right?
Ooh.
Now, why is that? Well, partly because they were expensive and I don't want to wear them out. So I want them to last a long time.
We all want to know what they are now.
Also, and there's nothing special about these shorts. Let me be clear. These shorts hold nothing special about the way they were made or anything else, except for that they are my racing shorts. And I've always had a pair of racing shorts for years and years. And so whatever it is, it's just those were the ones for that time until they wear out or something.
Are they the ones you bought at that running store?
They are, in fact, because they were full price. I didn't buy them on sale, which is like, I never buy running clothes that are not on sale. So then it was like, I spent all that money on these shorts.
Yeah, and it was like attached to a memory.
That's true too. I didn't think about that, but we were specifically at this race that was kind of like a high performance meet type of environment, where it's a little bit more selective. It was hard to get into it. It was like a mystery meet back during the COVID years, when track meets they couldn't tell you where they were ahead of time. You had to like know the right person to call at exactly the right time, and he'd say, yes, you're in, meet me at this location and midnight on December 12th. So the point being, it was that kind of experience, and we were at one of those races. So yeah, maybe there's some association there too. I hadn't even thought of that, but that would be the case for those shorts. But I've had other racing shorts in the past where that wasn't the case.
Okay.
Point is, I put on those shorts and I know this is serious. But all it is just a different pair of shorts. So this is the concept of this positive performance cascade. We should leverage that. We should leverage that specifically when we are trying to achieve higher performance levels, because it does the thing that the self-regulation stuff we were just talking about, it does that in our head. It puts us in a higher state of self-regulation toward positive or approaching as opposed to avoiding state of mind.
Cool.
Okay, so that's 2. Now for our third, we're going to get even closer to the heart of the issue, which is this intuitive running sense. And this one in particular, I've been sitting on this for a while, and I think I've mentioned it, but I haven't really gone into it yet on the podcast. And part of it's because I've been kind of chewing on it a bit. Just not exactly sure what this means for us as we talk about these things, and how does this interact with some of the other big ideas that we tend to talk about on this podcast. But here it is in a nutshell. This one's fascinating. So again, this one came from Steve Magnus and Brad Stulberg on their website Growth Equation, but more specifically, it was published on Science Direct, and is a study around intuition and expertise and their effects on decision making. And so what they found in this study is that intuition minus experience, or without experience, produced bad decision making, as you might guess. But take the same individuals and provide some experience to build some expertise, and the decision making improves. Not surprising, right? And they did this in a whole bunch of random things, like some of it is like critical, difficult situations, like time sensitive. Some of it is like, think about evaluate the quality of something.
So not running related.
Some of it was athletics. Some of it was not. It was just all random stuff. Because the point was they're trying to see if the same results proved regardless of the situations. And of course, pretty much did. So here's what's fascinating, and the conclusion that Magnus draws. He then elaborates on the concept here in a different context. So I'll give that. But the point is they found that intuition, the idea of trust your gut, is bad advice unless it's associated with an analytical and experience or expertise driven understanding.
So I was actually thinking about this earlier today without the connection of this conversation, and it's the rehearsal. It is the importance of running through scenarios that you might encounter and deciding beforehand how you'll react, and evaluating that. And then when you do come into that situation, you can trust your gut because you have thought it through, or maybe you've even sought wisdom of other people. Like if this situation happens, or maybe you just are around them and you're like, I the way that they did this thing, or when they encountered this challenge in their life, I want to respond like that. So it's a different layers and different intentions. Like you'll either be thinking about it, maybe on a run, even thinking about these scenarios that might happen in your life, or you're going to be like watching like races. Watching races, listening to races unfold, listening to other people's stories and things that they found success through and how they got there. So all these things I think help develop the gut, the rehearsal. But running and training specifically, that is very tangible. In training, you are training your gut.
Yeah, well, and so in 2 layers here. The first is back to your previous point with Dr. Hutter's research on self-regulation. You have to put yourself in situations where you condition self-regulation. It's not necessarily something that's natural to us. Now, we're talking about, in that instance, like your mental emotional state and reactions to those things. But fundamentally, it's true across any kind of decision-making process. We have to be in a situation where we have to condition those responses. So the same thing is true of our intuitive response to something, where you can have bad intuition. And that's kind of the principle behind the study. But then as Magnus was drawing upon it, and this is the example he elaborates on, and then I'll come back to the second one, which is the Kenneth Rooks example from the steeplechase. So Magnus suggests then that we can see this more clearly when we look at obsessive compulsive disorder. Okay, so by principle, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, is itself demonstrably bad intuition, which where you have a person reacting to a situation in a kind of a gut instinctual reaction that is not a natural or fitting reaction to it. It's an over-the-top reaction to the thing. And so when you work with a patient, as Magnus is describing here, when you work with a patient who is dealing with OCD, one of the things you do and do constantly is help the person condition a more appropriate response to something, so that then that intuitive gut reaction improves over time. And it can happen. So that's another principle of the thing, is like OCD is not itself just a state of being forever and always, in a sense.
It's usually about specific things.
Yes, very
not
specific
even
things.
like throughout your whole life.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Specific
yeah, very specific things. And so in addressing those specific things, it's something that they can work to. Well, why is this possible? Why can we condition someone with a neurological condition like obsessive compulsive disorder? Well, because you create different kinds of pathways in your brain. You're conditioning your brain and how it's reacting and responding to things. Goes back to the self-regulation concept and this placebo idea with our positive performance cascade. We are creating new conditions for our brain to then wire differently.
Mm-hmm. And from my own personal experience, struggling with anxiety, that is also a reaction. It feels guttural, right? Like I feel this, something happens, or I am faced with something that I'm uncomfortable with or something, then I have this like feeling, right? This bodily reaction to my anxiety. And so having to work through that and rewiring myself with my anxiety to have a better reaction to uncomfortable situations or whatever this anxiety is coming from, but having that be part of my rewiring as well. So like personally, and then we know people who have struggled with all kinds of things like this. And you probably in your life have been affected by some way that how you've had to rewire and have been wired in a way that's been detrimental to you.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and complex. It's a multi-layered thing. But at its core, the idea of like, because I feel this way, I should do this thing is entirely untrue at a baseline value. That may be the case, but it also may be entirely the opposite. Because I feel this way, I may not be necessarily experiencing a well-conditioned intuition, or an appropriately conditioned intuition, if you will. And so then as we tackle a topic like this, we're like, okay, that's a really big topic. The principle that Magnus draws upon then is it's like, well, we have these instincts that we need to condition so that we can respond well and effectively, adapted well to the situation. And so then when we take on something like, it's very simple in context compared to like broad life, but when we take on something like running, for instance, and the idea of intuitive training, then it's really a fairly straightforward thing. You should not assume that you, by saying, I'm going to train by feel or effort or exertion, those are all three slightly different things, as we've expressed on the podcast, you should not assume that making that decision to do that means from that point on, you're going to do it very well and effectively right away. You're not. Chances are you're not.
And that's very uncomfortable for people.
Yeah.
A lot of our athletes, they're like, I don't know if I'm doing this right. I don't know. Like if I'm
because
hitting
the
these
intuition
efforts
is
right.
not yet developed.
But that's part of it. That's part of learning, and you're not going to get it right. And guess what? That's okay. It's part of the learning.
As Dr. Hutter said, we need to put ourselves in the situation where we experience it and then practice and rehearse the right kinds of responses to those things. And so it's a kind of thing that we develop over time. So Andy's comment a moment ago, and the other example with Kenneth Rooks. So Ken Rooks was the U.S. champion in the 3,000 meter steeplechase, and he was also the NCAA champion, and I keep forgetting that. So I'm trying to remember who the last person was. They were talking about this. The last person who won the NCAA steeplechase and the USA championships in the same year. It was a long time ago. So, and anyway, he did that, which is amazing by itself. But this is the race where he fell and fell hard and was a fair bit out of it. But then in post-race interviews, and because he came back and he won the race and all of that, and he didn't just win it though, didn't he? Win it in like he won it in a personal best time. So he actually ran a really good performance on top of, like for himself, on top of winning the race. So they ask him in the post-race interviews, and he's like, well, yeah, I prepared for that exact incident.
He fell, by the way. I don't know if you said that
yet. I did. Yep, okay. I said that. So he's like, I knew what I was going to do if I fell. I already had planned it. And so, of course, a steeplechaser may say that because a steeplechaser is much more likely to fall than most other runners. So most of us have had that experience of, I fell, but I already knew I was going to get up and do X, Y, or Z because I've done it before, and in fact, he has fallen before in a major race too. But so as it goes, here he says, well, I actually already knew what I was going to do because I rehearsed, at least cognitively, rehearsed the decision. And that's, put myself in the mental, emotional state, at least in terms of rehearsal in that instance, but also literally because he's experienced it in the past. And he was able to do that. I do not think that would have gone the same way if he had not prepared himself for that likelihood and if he hadn't already experienced similar types of things in the past.
It's true. And if you think about what would my reaction be if I fell without thinking about it? Let's say in any race, if I fell and I didn't mentally prepare for that, I would surge to try to catch back up with the group I was running with.
Well, for a number of reasons, right?
But that
an emotional
reaction. It's an emotional reaction. I'm fired up. I'm maybe even a little mad.
Well, and that instant adrenaline shot that you get from the fall makes you feel good doing the surge after the fall. Yeah.
But if you are able to think about it beforehand and plan for it in advance, then it's a rewiring. Me surging and connecting with this group and zooming to the front all in a 400-meter span will cause me to tank. So if I think about that, okay, I'm going to start catching slowly. I'm going to take them one by one. That's what he did. He took them one by one, and that led to his success in this race.
Yeah.
And that wouldn't have been, I don't think, most people's guttural reaction. It'd be one, to lay there and cry because it was a big opportunity and you fell. That's sad. Or to get up and then, surge ahead. That would be probably most people's guttural reaction. So,
yep.
That was a great example. I like it. And it's very recent. Great example. So it's
very
recent exciting.
One, yeah. Yeah. So in conclusion, as we kind of wrap up some of these things, in principle, you have to teach yourself to oppose your instincts insofar as those instincts are ineffective or counterproductive. So you have to be willing to say, this is how I feel, but that's not the right course of action here. And that's a hard place to be cognitively. There's a lot of dissonance in those moments. And so the rehearsal aspect, Dr. Hutter's suggestion is key. And then we also have to remember, as the conclusion was drawn by the researchers here, our results demonstrate the importance of domain expertise in intuitive decision-making. And so not only the rehearsal and growing that, but also building our experience and expertise over time. It requires patience and incremental growth. It's not the kind of thing that it's like, I didn't do it well, now I'm doing it well. It's a slow growth over time.
Yeah. And as we've been talking about this, I was also thinking about how distance running lends itself to really good training of your mind, because you are getting out there each day and you are making this decision, bad weather, good weather, lack of sleep, when you don't want to do it. So you're getting out there and you're doing the work when your instincts are saying no, stay in bed. And
well, there's that. There's also, we have to remember that practicing every day is not as helpful to me if I'm practicing in the wrong way. And so that's where this idea of ensuring that I'm addressing what is the most effective or the most productive choice or decision making that I should be rehearsing here, and trying to do things then that daily practice in that sense is more effective. Mm-hmm. So we have now fixed all of your cognitive concerns around running. by those simple. Actually, no, that
it's
that wasn't
far more complex.
That wasn't even the premise of the topic. We weren't trying to fix any problems, but we've given you some tangible thoughts, hopefully, to contemplate as you exercise your own progress toward self-regulation and intuitive, but not just intuitive, but effectively and reliably intuitive decisions in your training.
Mm-hmm. Let's get on to the world of running.
First, let's shout out some A to Z runners. We've got a whole bunch of things going on recently. At the Coast Guard races, Dan, Julie, Kristen, and Mark all ran the doubles, the 5K, 10K double, which is, that's always, that's a tough one, especially in the middle of July when it's hot.
And they're tough courses, too.
And they're tough courses. So congrats, all four of you. Well done. Additionally, Dan was first in age group in both when he did the double. Julie was second in age group in the 10K and fourth in the 5K at that. So well done. Good, strong stuff. At the Pewamo mini meet, Jacob was second overall in the 3,200 meter run, which is impressive. Good work.
Good work.
Robert ran 10K at the Lake Lansing team relay. And on other terrain, there's an event called the Cross Country Team Challenge. And we had a number of people participating in teams. Because it's a team challenge, they don't give like individual results. So it's always hard to figure out exactly who did what. But we know Marissa, Andrew, Ben, CJ, and Dan were all there doing things. And so congrats to those and many others who participated in that one too.
That's awesome. Way to suffer.
Way to suffer.
Cross country.
Cross country. That's like running on
so
dirt
hard.
and grass and trails. And
yeah.
I love it.
Speaking of hard things, championships. They're here. They're about. We talked about the U.S. championships last week. Was it the U.S.? No, it was Monaco and London.
It was recently when we talked about the U.S. championships. A couple weeks ago, I think. But whatever it was not long ago. And yeah, this is kind of championship season for track and field. And so we had like the UK championships, the Kenyan championships all kind of happening around the same time as the US championships, a number of others as well. Here's a few others we wanted to share with you. What we've been trying to do basically is give you a sense of like the who's who at the top levels, because these are the people you're going to be seeing when you watch the World Championships.
So much fun.
You're definitely going to do that.
It's so much fun.
And if you don't do that, you at least will hear us talk about it, and you want to get a sense for who are these people and what are the things that they've accomplished. So just a quick note here about a few other national title events. And remember that in all of these, they don't decide their teams for the World Championships strictly based on the results of their national championships. So there's a hybrid of discretionary selections as well. So we'll just give you kind of an impression of some of those you are likely to see. So from Canada, we had a number of strong performances, including Reagan Yee in the women's steeplechase, 3,000 meters, setting a new championship record time, which is not the first time apparently she has set the championship record in the women's steeplechase. And so she, based both on that performance and her world ranking, we can expect her at the World Championships. Mm-hmm. So look for Reagan Yee. Ben Flanagan in the men's 5,000. No surprise there, but also based on his world ranking, should be able to get into the World Championships. We should see him there, and he won that title as well. And then Brianna Scott for the women's 5,000. Same thing. A very strong performance. Her season has been just an incredible one, where she has dropped her 5K time over the course of the entirety of the season by 30 seconds.
Wow.
That's a chunk to take off. And now, having done so, will make her debut in the World Championships this year as the Canadian champion.
Wow.
So, well done. Well done to Brianna Scott as well. And then in Ireland, Brian Fay, who just recently set the Irish national record in the 5,000 meters, proceeded to then win the championship 5,000 meters. Not surprising, but he did it in a way that was demonstrable because he won in a very, very fast final 400 meters.
55 seconds.
55 seconds.
Smoking.
So what that is it's like, okay, that's a good sign because you're going to need to be able to do that on the world stage. If you can't do that, you're not really going to be in the conversation.
So good practice. He's rehearsing.
Good practice. Indeed he is. And so then a quick note here that the 1,500-meter specialists, Andrew Koskaren, who's definitely had some impressive performances this year for the men's, and then Kiara McGeehan, you remember we mentioned her in that mile when Faith Kipyegon set the mile world record. She was second in that race among like the best of the best in the world. And so that was awesome.
PR and national
she's going to be at the she's going to be at the World Championships, but she bowed out of the Irish Championships. Apparently that Monaco race was not friendly for her. She left the race with some minor injury concerns is the way they're framing it.
Okay.
So hopefully it's nothing more than that.
Hopefully,
and see her back in action at the world stage. And then lastly here, I just wanted a quick note, this race, this from the Spanish National Championships, the men's 1,500 meters, we have like the Spanish record holder and everything, Mo Katir, was the clear favorite for the race, ends up getting outkicked in what amounted to a very impressive last 400, but especially last 100 by Adele Michal. Actually, I think they call him Michal in the announcers. And so as he's doing this, you're watching this race and you're thinking, okay, Katir looks, just no matter what he's doing, he always looks like he's working hard. Michal looks like he's like giving everything he's got.
Really?
And then he has another gear. And so it was kind of an interesting thing. But notably, Michal has a long history of successful performances at the world stage. You could say he's kind of the veteran of the group in this particular instance here. He's placed 4th in the World Championships in 2017, 5th in the Olympics in Tokyo. So not surprising that he could win a race like this over world-class talent like Mo Katir and Mario Garcia Romo, who, by the way, finished in 3rd and did not look great in the closing lap. They just kind of ran, the two of them just kind of ran away from him. But everyone's saying, okay, so this On Athletics Club guy, clearly Ritz knows what he's doing. He's preparing him for World Championships. The Spanish National Championships is not necessarily that important, although if he would have not finished in the top 3, then he could have lost potentially his ticket for World Championships.
But he got 3rd, so.
But he got 3rd.
Yeah.
Barely. 4th was right behind him.
Woo.
But as it goes, we'll wait to cast any kind of judgments on these types of things until the big dance, World Championships. So expect all 3 of those guys to be in the World Championships. We don't know exactly what events, because Mo Katir has just as much a chance at good performances in the 5,000 as he does in the 1,500, and he's gone both ways in terms of the season. So we'll see.
We'll see. Now, the USATF road racing circuit continues with the 7-mile championships. 7 miles. The
I really like, by the way, I've run one 20K. Is it 20K? 12K, sorry. I've run one 12K, which is 7 and like 600 meters.
Math is hard.
Yeah. It was very fun. I liked the distance.
Okay. Well, we should do this because I have friends in Quad Cities. So
what's Quad Cities? Oh,
where
the place.
Bix 7 is.
The place, yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So let's give you a little breakdown of these races. In the men's race, Frank Lara led early on. All the men went out together. Pretty much, it's a fairly large group. And at mile 5 was when there was any change. Simbasa pushed the pace. Bison Simbasa pushed the pace and led a pack that formed from then. And Clayton Young ended up putting a surge on the final downhill, passing Simbasa, but Simbasa responded to the challenge and he ended up winning in a final kick. He's no stranger to winning, by the way.
Neither of them are.
No, neither of them are.
Both multiple-time champions.
Yeah. And Clayton Young ended up runner-up, and 3rd was Reed Buchanan. And a little championship status, Leonard Career is leading with 58 points in the USATF road racing circuit with Jacob Thompson with 43 points, and we have Simbasa in 3rd overall with 36 points. This is his this is his first win of 2023, but he was runner-up in a previous event.
Okay, all right.
On the women's side, this is in contrast to the men's. They went out hard, and it strung out early. Yep. In fact, it was 4 women, not too long.
Not a big pack.
After, there's some hills in this race. It's a very difficult course, but after just the opening hills, there was only 4 women: Kellen Taylor, Alifine Tulimak, Edna Kurget, and Annie Frisbee. And even from there, it became a 2-woman race between Taylor, and Tuliamuk, who
Kellen Taylor.
Kellen Taylor, yeah.
I would not expect her to be on the level with these other names at this point in her career.
She's 7 months postpartum.
Is that how recent it was?
Yes.
Wow.
I know.
All the more.
Wow. So Kellen Taylor coming out with the victory over her teammate and fellow mother runner, Elifine Tuliamuk.
Mother runner.
Yeah, she is.
Yep.
I love what they're doing there. It's great stuff. And then Edna Kurgat was third. You'll remember us talking about her because she was the 25K championship winner in Grand Rapids. She also won another one recently. Which one was that? 6K?
Don't know.
6K maybe.
Don't know exactly.
Anyway, she won another one recently. So she is definitely on a winning spree.
Yeah, and we don't have the point total for the women here for you this time yet. But the running circuit will continue. And now that things are starting to, the totals are starting to climb, you start to see separation. And it's always interesting to find out then who's kind of got the likely potential for winning that prize purse at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Was that running circuit
I don't know if she did win the 25K. I'm second guessing myself now.
Go ahead and second guess yourself. For now, we're going to move on to the third item here. Which is, we may have included this in the topic in our kind of research survey earlier, except that it's not necessarily the same type of thing, but we still wanted to share because this is a very recent study that brings about just some fun, positive.
It's good to know.
Yeah, positive news on running.
Yeah, so in May of 2023, this was published, so not too long ago if you're listening in recent times. This study was called Running Throughout Middle Age Keeps Old Adult-Born Neurons Wired.
Keeps old adult-born neurons. Okay, got it.
So in simple terms, this abstract of the study was conducted on mice, and it was to understand how exercise can affect the brain and memory as we age and how the long-term effect of running. And the interesting thing was, I guess it might be what you expect, your brain works better. It's able to fire better. It might not be able to show that like you create new neurons, but you're able to use them and fire them more effectively. Yeah.
That's not surprising. There's a number of things that happen at a hormone and other small level enzyme is the word I was looking for. Hormones and enzymes in our body as we're running that definitely help us.
Yeah. So running increased the connections from other cells to the hippocampus, a part of the brain that's important for memory, to these new brain cells. It also prevented the loss of connections from certain areas in the brain that are essential for memory. So overall, the study suggests that regular exercise like running can have positive effects on brain health and memory, especially as we age. It helps maintain the connections of new brain cells and may protect against age-related memory problems and brain deterioration.
How much running?
It didn't say, well, it might have said, but I didn't write that down. So,
well, in principle, it was a mice study, right?
Yeah.
And so we can't draw that line because amount of running for mouse and amount of running for man is not the same thing. But
legs are different sizes,
Well, and so I think the simplest form of the conclusion is regular exercise, specifically regular exercise that is of the lower intensity, longer sustained variety. And why that is specifically here is simply because it promotes more continued blood flow and more active state sustained over time. So these are good things.
Yeah.
And it tells me two things here. One is I like running, so I'm going to continue trying to do that, and it should be helping me in other ways, and that's good. But if I can't run, I like other kinds of exercises that are similar in capacity. And so if I can't run as much and I can fill my time with some of those other things, these benefits, insofar as they exist, are supported. So I appreciate this type of good feelings research.
Me too. It just helps us carry on.
Speaking of carrying on, we would love to help you carry on further by answering your questions.
I was hoping you were start singing.
Why would I do that? So we would love to hear your questions. You can share them anytime at AtoZrunning.com/question. And we'll share some thoughts and response. We'll put them on the Q&A episode at the end of the month, all those types of things to keep the good ideas in your mind to enter into our conversation here.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.